Right. As most of you know, we have been doing an overview of the Old Testament. And one of the reasons that I gave at the beginning of that is because I have sensed that most Christians in most churches, even the very best of them, are not familiar with the stories of the Old Testament. It is through these stories and encounters with God in the Old Testament that we get glimpses of what God plans to do with the Messiah when he shows up on the scene. It is also in the Old Testament that God gives us a glimpse of the future when the Messiah returns to take charge of the world. We cannot afford not to know the Old Testament. And as I said, the Old Testament is 4,000 years of history. 2,000 of it pertains to pre-Israel history. 2,000 of those years pertains to Israel's history. We have finished up the 2,000 years of pre-Israel history, covered by 11 chapters in the Bible. The remaining 918 chapters in the Old Testament pertain to Israel. Do you think Israel's important to God? You better believe it. And it better be important to us. God has devoted an incredible amount of pulp to letting us know what he thinks of Israel. So as we look at Israel's history, I've divided it up. I want you to be able to think your way through Israel's history. I've divided it up into 4 categories. Pre-monarchy. Those are the days of Israel's history before Israel had a monarch or a king. This is followed by the days in which Israel did have a king, the monarchy. This is followed by God's tossing them out of the land, a 70-year exile in Babylon, and then he brings a group of them back in the return. But as we've been looking at the pre-monarchy years, about 1,000 years, we began with the patriarchs, the fathers of the nation of Israel. And we know, because God says it often enough, that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the patriarchs. These are the fathers. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Hopefully you saw that in our scripture reading this morning. And Israel had 12 sons whose families grew into the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, as I said each week, that as we've been looking at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that there's a little overlap in the stories because they're related to one another. Last week, we finished up Isaac, but a lot of the story, when we finished up Isaac, pertained to Jacob. So, what did we discover last week? Jacob, the deceiver, the heel grabber, is a fellow who was from the womb ambitious. And it is prefigured in the way that he and his twin brother Esau were born. Esau comes out first, but he's not alone because there's a hand grabbing his heel. Like, not so fast, boy. I want to be first. And this is Jacob's life. And everything to which Esau the older was entitled, Jacob wanted it. And he began looking for an opportunity, and he saw his opportunity to get the birthright from Esau when Esau came in from hunting, and he was very, very hungry, and he wants some of what Jacob is cooking, and Jacob says, no, I want your birthright. You sell it to me for what I'm cooking. I'll give you a bowl of this lentil stew if you give me your birthright. Now, reminder, what is the birthright? The birthright, normally given to the oldest son, entitles him to the lion's share of daddy's property and possessions. He gets a double share, and Jacob wants this. And Esau thinks he's so hungry that he's dying, says, fine, you can have it. So Jacob gets the birthright away from Esau. But to get the blessing, he's got to get a little bit more crafty, and his mother comes along to help him with an absolute tale of deception. Now, the blessing differs from the birthright in this way. The blessing confers all the entitlements of your father as far as his title and his leadership to the person who gets blessed. So Jacob is not only going to be the leader of the family over his brother Esau, but he is also entitled to what Isaac inherited from Abraham and was conferred upon him by God, and that is the promises and the covenant, from whom the Christ, the Messiah, the one who would bless all the nations of the world, would come. So Jacob disguises himself in accordance with his mother's advice as Esau. His father is mostly blind, and he ends up blessing Jacob instead of Esau. This is not good. So, what do we learn? Our sin cannot prevent what God has planned. Isaac knew of the prophecy given to Rebekah while those twins were still in the womb, that the older will serve the younger. That means he's going to be the chief. He's going to be in charge. But Isaac was determined to bless Esau. And our sin cannot prevent what God has planned. What God determines will come to pass will come to pass. He's sovereign. God is able to perform that which he has promised and purposed and planned. And no matter how much we strive or resist it, it cannot be prevented. And any good that comes from a story such as Jacob's can be attributed only to God. Because as we're going to see all the way up until the end, Jacob does almost nothing right. And yet God is determined to hang on to him and to bless him, and that can be only from God. All right, another thing we learn, and we will continue to learn as we look at the life of Jacob, is when we're motivated by our appetites, our ambitions, or our affections, we are going to end up coming up empty. If you are using all of your energy and your efforts, and your aim in life is to improve your standing in the community, to increase your wealth, or whatever it is that you want to be doing, if that's what motivates you, you are going to end up never having enough, even though you may have plenty. You are going to come up empty. Who was motivated by his appetites? Well, Isaac was. Why was Esau Isaac's favorite son? Because he liked the game that he brought in from the field, and he liked how he cooked it. And so he was ruled by his appetites. And like father, like son, who else was ruled by his appetites? Esau himself. Esau says, what good is a birthright to me if I'm starving to death? Give me something to eat. And he was ruled by his appetites. And he gave up, and he came up empty when it came to the birthright. Who was ruled by his ambitions? Well, Jacob. Jacob wants what belongs to Esau. And his mother, she's ruled by ambitions for her favorite son, who is Jacob. Isaac's favorite son is Esau. Didn't work out really well. Who's ruled by his affections? Isaac, his affections for Esau. Rebekah, her affections for Jacob and wanting him to be first and having him get everything. And you know what? After they devised that little plan and Jacob got sent off to Mesopotamia, Rebekah came up empty because she never saw her son again. Folks, these guys had their favorite children. They're ruled by their affections. Jacob's story reveals how desperately we need God to make our lives work. All right, so this week we're going to see Jacob flees to Haran to avoid Esau's wrath. Now there's a couple of motivations in sending him up to Mesopotamia. His mother has overheard his brother Esau saying that he plans to kill him because he's been cheated out of his birthright and he's been cheated out of his blessing. So his mother wants to get him out of Dodge to save his life. So, still conniving, she heads over to Isaac, her husband, and says, you know, I don't like the women that Esau has married. We can't have Jacob marrying these Canaanites or any Ishmaelites like Esau. So what do you say we send him out to get a wife? So Isaac's motivation to get Jacob out of Dodge is to find him a wife. His mother's motivation is to save his life. So Isaac called Jacob and he blessed him and he charged him, you shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. Arise and go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife from there, from one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. This is his uncle. God Almighty, El Shaddai, bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be a company of peoples. May he give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may take the possession of the land of your sojournings, which God gave Abraham. You see what's going on here? Even Isaac, who was reluctant to bless anybody but Esau, has recognized that this is the Lord's plan. And the promises that were made to Abraham were passed on to Isaac, not Ishmael, God's choice. And the promises that were made to Abraham and now belong to Isaac have been passed on to Jacob, not Esau, God's choice. And Esau is acknowledging this, and he is saying words that show that he has finally gotten in line with God's plan to make a great nation out of Abraham's people. And thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. Now let me say something about having favorite children. How did it work out for Esau or Isaac and Rebekah? It didn't work out well at all. So be careful about having favorite children. Because if you've got affections for someone or something that diverts your attention and distracts you away from what you are supposed to be doing as a man or a wife, a husband and a father, then you're going to miss God's direction in your life. And you're going to end up making a hash of the whole thing. My mother had a favorite child. It was the boy who lived next door. All right, let me tell you where Jacob had to go. You see down there in the lower left-hand corner where Beersheba is? That's the southwest corner of the land of Israel. You've heard it all throughout the Old Testament if you read the Old Testament. From Dan to Beersheba is from the northeast to the southwest. Anything down below Beersheba is you're heading into Egypt. And that's where they are, and that's where Jacob gets sent out from, and he makes his first stop up there. You see where Bethel is? Just a little bit north of Jerusalem. Now, the name of Bethel used to be Luz, L-U-Z. You know what you call people from Luz? Losers. Okay. But Jacob renames it Bethel, which means house of God. And from there he leaves the land and heads up there to northwestern Mesopotamia in the Padan Aram area outside of the city of Haran, which is where Abraham's relatives live. Now Jacob came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. This is the place he calls Bethel. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. He dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder, really a staircase that was set up on the earth in his dream, and the top of it reached up into heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on that staircase. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I am giving to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south, and in you, and in your seed, a reference to Jesus Christ, shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I'll bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. And folks, we are going to see for the next 20 years that Jacob does nothing but bad stuff. And God brings him back anyway. Why? Because whatever God wants to do, he gets it done. Now, this is God's affirmation to Jacob, that he indeed is the perpetuator of the promise that God gave to Abraham, the keeper of the covenant that God gave to Abraham and to his father Isaac, and now is in the lap of Jacob. Did he get it because he deserved it? No. Folks, but this is our God. Everything that we have by God is by grace. Now, I want to point out a certain part of what we just read. He dreamed, and behold, there was a staircase set up on the earth, and the top of it reached up into heaven, and behold, the angels of the Lord were ascending and descending upon it. Kind of a strange thing, isn't it? And nothing else is really said about that until Jesus comes along and says to Nathanael, truly, truly, I am saying to you that you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon a staircase? No, upon the Son of Man. And this reminds us really of a couple things. Jesus is saying that picture in the Old Testament, that the dream that Jacob had was of me, because I, and I alone, am the way to the Father. And no one comes to the Father except by me. And we've been seeing glimpses of God's redemption all throughout the Old Testament. Also, what about the angels? Well, in one of the Psalms, 90 or 91, I believe, it says that he will give his angels charge of you to guard you in all of your ways. And as we saw that angels came and ministered to Jesus Christ on at least a couple of occasions, like here after his temptation when Jesus needed something to eat after the devil left him, and even when Jesus was praying in the garden on the night when he was betrayed, there was an angel there encouraging him. So angels ministered to Jesus Christ, but that psalm is not just for Jesus. It's intended for us as well. And the author to Hebrews tells us that angels are messengers sent to minister to those who are receiving salvation. So in Christ, we get the advantage of angelic ministry. Okay. So Jacob makes a vow there at Bethel because of this dream. And he said, if God will be with me, is there a red flag going off in anybody's mind? We're putting conditions on God. If God will be with me, and I can see God, and will keep me in this way that I'm going, which is not God's way, and he will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I come again to my Father's house in peace, then if the Lord does all this for me, if the Lord comes through for me, then I'll follow him. Then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give a tenth to you." Folks, I can't tell you how many people I meet that have given up on God because God has not come through for them. It's not the way it works. God is God. And we must say, whatever you have decided will be good. Okay? He's God. We're not. So Jacob flees to Haran to avoid Esau's wrath, and he gets there, and the first one in the family that he sees is this luscious redhead named Rachel. Well, I assume she's a redhead because she's so pretty. And Jacob is immediately smitten with this girl, and she takes him back to meet her father, who is Laban, which is Jacob's uncle. And he tells him the whole sad story about what happened down there and why he had to get out of Dodge. Now, you remember the last time that we met up with Laban, Abraham's slave had marched into town looking for a wife for Isaac, Jacob's father. And he got Rebekah, who was, at the time, a godly woman. Brought her back, and he had taken 10 camels up to Haran with all kinds of gifts for the family. And one of the first things out of the slave's mouth was, "My master Isaac is a very rich man." And Laban's eyelids went like a cash register. And now here comes Isaac's son, the one who's got the blessing. He's got to be rich too, right? And then Jacob tells him the story, and he's got nothing. Remember I said you would end up empty if you're motivated by your ambitions? And that's where Jacob is. And so after a month, it's getting a little awkward, and Laban decides to put him to work. He says, "What do you want for your wages?" He says, "I want your youngest daughter, Rachel." He says, "Okay, 7 years. You work for me for 7 years, and I will give you Rachel." And here he is, Jacob, a man that's ruled by his affections. How was Rebekah, his mother, chosen? The servant prayed to God a very specific prayer. "Oh, she's pretty, Lord, but I need some affirmation from you that she's the one. Let her water me. Let her water my camels. Let's see if she's got a servant's heart." How is Jacob making his decision? She looks good to me. And the 7 years went by like it was nothing. Okay? And Laban says, in accordance with this offer, well, he doesn't exactly say yes. He doesn't exactly say no. He says, "Well, it's better I should give her to you than somebody else." That wouldn't give me a lot of confidence that my father-in-law, or future father-in-law, wants me to marry his daughter. And sure enough, Laban has something up his sleeve. See, Rachel has an older sister who's not nearly as pretty, and I'm being kind. Jacob is about to discover that those who resist the right road are in for a rough ride, because he's a cheat and he's a deceiver, but he's got nothing on his uncle Laban. And one of Jacob's purposes on earth is to fill the earth with God's glory. Why did Jesus say that we are to let our light shine before men so that they can see our good works, so that they can pat us on the back? No, so that our Heavenly Father can be glorified. And why is God raising up the nation of Israel? So all the other nations know what our God is like. How has Jacob contributed to this purpose? He has not. And we've got to stop and ask ourselves at some point, how are we fulfilling our purpose to make the name of our God great in this community, in this state, among the people with whom we work or go to the gym or whatever we do, because that's why he's left us here on earth. Jacob is making no contributions whatsoever. So, Jacob gets married and has children. But on the night of his wedding, because weddings took place in the evening, Laban took his daughter Leah and brought her in the dark, heavily veiled, to Jacob. And Jacob went into her. And in the custom of those days, and in the custom of the Jews right up to Jesus' day, you spent 7 days alone in the tent with your new wife to enjoy her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. And in the morning, behold, you open up the tent flaps, let a little sunshine in, and it's not Rachel, it's Leah. And that must have been an awkward moment for poor Leah, because Jacob probably got up, stormed out of the tent, and left her sitting there in tears, a rejected wife. And so he goes to confront Laban. What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? What sounds like Rachel? Rachel sounds like Rachel. Leah does not sound like Rachel. Leah does not look like Rachel. Why then have you deceived me? Because God is not mocked, and whatsoever you sow, that also shall you reap. Oh, he didn't say that. Laban said, it is not done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Why didn't you tell me this 7 years ago? Complete the week of this one. In other words, 7 days in the tent alone with Leah. And we will give you the other also. He can't even bring himself to say Rachel's name. The other also, in return for serving me yet another 7 years. So Jacob did so, and he completed her week, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to wife. He gave Rachel immediately, but he still had to work another 7 years. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her maid. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban another 7 years. So we've got this favoritism that he noticed in his father Isaac, and this favoritism that he experienced with his mother Rebekah, and he is now playing favorites himself. Now I want you to have some perspective of where the 12 tribes came from. You see that chart right there up in the middle on the top, that blue man taking a break from his job in Las Vegas is Jacob. And the gal on his, on your left is Leah. And the gal on the right is Rachel. And each of them came with a maid, Zilpah and Bilhah. And so Leah begins to have children immediately. And she has Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah, and then she stops bearing children for a while. And Rachel sees that she's not having any children, so she takes her maid Bilhah, and gives her to Jacob, and she gives Jacob Dan and Naphtali, which rightfully belonged to Rachel because Bilhah is her slave girl. And Leah says, oh yeah? Well, two can play that game. And so she takes her handmaiden, Zilpah, and gives her to her husband Jacob. And Zilpah gives Jacob Gad and Asher. And after this, Leah has a couple of more children, Issachar and Zebulun, and then she has a daughter named Dinah, some girl who was always in the kitchen with somebody. All right, so that's where the 12 tribes come from, and you notice that it's from various mothers. And this is going to be important because Jacob is going to divide this gang up into different companies when his brother Esau starts approaching where he is. So Jake gets married and has children, and he works for 14 years, and guess what he has? He has only a family. He has no way of keeping them alive. He's still working for his father-in-law, Laban. And while he lives with Laban, guess who the patriarch of the family is? It's Laban. That's the custom. All of the children and the grandchildren belong to Laban. All of the flocks, they all belong to Laban. And Jacob has nothing. And so he says, I want to get out of town. And so he says to Laban, send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know the service which I have given you. But Laban said to him, if you will allow me to say so, I have learned by divination. Laban serves another god. Remember that Yahweh has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and how your cattle have fared with me. For you had very little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. Do you remember the promise that God gave Abraham? I will bless you so that you may be a blessing. And sure enough, wherever Abraham's children have gone, in whatever countries they have lived, those countries have been blessed by God because of the presence of Abraham's children. And God is blessing Laban, who does not deserve it, because of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Is it Jacob's intention to bless Laban? No. Jacob lives for himself. All he's been thinking about from his birth is what's in it for me. And now he wants to get out of Dodge because there has been nothing in it for him. Now, folks, when you go to work, do you ever pray that God will bless the company for whom you work because you work there? Not my immediate boss, but the big boss over all the stores for which I work. And I were on the phone the other day. And he said, you know, you're doing pretty well. I says, yeah, but that's not my goal. My goal is that I will be a blessing to this chain of stores. Because he's a Christian who goes to a worthwhile church up in the Argo area, and I knew he would understand. Folks, do you pray that prayer? Do you pray that you will be a blessing to your employer? It wasn't Jacob's intention, but God blessed Laban anyway. So it's been 14 years, and he's got nothing of his own. So, how does Jacob accumulate flocks of his own? Well, let's continue with the conversation. He continues with the conversation with Laban, and Laban says, well, what do you want me to give you? And Jacob says, you shall not give me anything. This I will do for you. Or if you will do this for me, I will again feed your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all of your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And these will be my wages. And Jacob is doing him a favor, because those are the less desirable of the sheep. Those are the less desirable of the goats. Now, what happens is that Laban says, well, will you excuse me for just a moment? And he summons his sons and he says, go to the flocks quickly and get out all of the spotted ones and all of the striped ones and get them out of here, because I have promised them to Jacob. The cheat has been cheated, because you reap what you sow. However, it's time for God to intervene. And God intervened in such a way so that whenever Laban's strongest and healthiest sheep and goats were mating, they produced spotted and striped. So folks, even if people cheat you, even if they do you wrong, God is able to bless you. Okay? And so he did. And thus Jacob grew exceedingly rich and had large flocks and maidservants and menservants and camels and those other things, donkeys. Now Jacob heads home. This goes on for 6 years, and it's getting kind of uncomfortable because Laban and his sons are convinced, and they're telling everybody in the neighborhood, the only reason that Jacob has so many sheep and goats is because he's stealing them from our father Laban. And Laban doesn't show him the same favor. And Jacob is tired of this, and he wants to go home. And so he summons his wives, Leah and Rachel, and said, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. But the God of my father has been with me. You're going to notice a change in Jacob. He's starting to acknowledge that God is coming through on the deal. Not only has God kept him alive in this strange land, but now God is the one who has made him rich. You know, I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. So he's given the credit to God. And the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And he said, here I am. What's that mean? It means I'm listening for once. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that leap upon the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. In other words, how he's cheating you. And I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Ah, it's been 20 years. You thought I forgot, huh? Now arise and go forth from this land and return to the land of your birth. And God is giving Jacob the okay to go back to the land of Canaan where his father is. Okay? But he doesn't want Laban trying to stop him. And so he waits for Laban and his sons to take their sheep and goats to the shearers. And when shepherds took their sheep and goats to the shearers to get the wool, this was a big event. Because it wasn't just them. It was all the shepherds in the area, and they gathered. And there was a lot of buying and selling and a lot of drinking and partying. And it was a great time of the year that they looked forward to. And it's during this time that Laban gathers his family and his flocks, and he gets out of Dodge. And he comes down. It wasn't a straight route. He comes down from Mesopotamia, and when he gets to where you see the word Succoth, those are the hills or the mountainous area of Gilead. Laban has heard that he has fled, and that's where he catches him. And on the night before he confronts Jacob the next day, because he can do him great harm, God appears to Laban in a dream and says, watch what you say to Jacob. And that's all he needed to say. And so the next day, Laban goes in and he confronts Jacob and the family. And he says essentially, hey, the family's mine, the flocks are mine. But what can I do? Yahweh warned me in a dream. And Jacob is starting to realize that none of his conniving or cheating could get him out of the situation with Laban, because Laban could have just taken all of it back to Mesopotamia with him, and that it was God who protected him. But now he's got another problem, because he has sent down to where Edom is, That's Esau's other name. Down below the Dead Sea, because he's afraid of his brother. And he knows that if he comes back in the land and Esau still wants to kill him, that there's nothing he can do about it. And so he sends messengers down and says, hey, I'm a rich guy. I don't need anything you've got, but I do hope to find favor in your sight. So the messengers come back and say, we got us some good news and we got us some bad news. He said, what's the good news? Your brother Esau is coming to see you. Well, what's the bad news? He's got 400 men with him. Now, why would Esau need 400 men? Okay. And now Jacob is really in a quandary. I couldn't do anything about Laban if he wanted to kidnap my wives and children and my flocks. And there's certainly nothing I can do about my brother Esau. So finally, Jacob prays. He finally goes to God, admits his helplessness. And he said O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will do you good. Folks, pray through the scriptures. If God has made promises to his people, he doesn't mind being reminded. And Jacob is reminding God of what he said, I will do you good. And now he says something that Jacob would never, ever, ever say. I am not worthy of all of the steadfast love and all of the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and slay us all, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will do you good, and I will make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. And just before he prayed, Jacob had divided all of his flocks into 2 groups. He says if Esau attacks the one, maybe the other one will get away. After his prayer, he sends out 4 companies of gifts from the sheep and the goats to his brother Esau. You remember reading about that with me this morning. And after that, he divides his family up into 4 groups. Zilpah and her children, Bilhah and her children, followed by Leah and her children, and Rachel and her children, which is, I know she has 2 children, but Benjamin hasn't been born yet. It's only Joseph at this time. And he puts them in the order of least favorite to favorite, and he saves Rachel for last. Okay? And that's where he is. And after he does this, Jacob wrestles with the angel of God. We know that this person is special. We know that Jacob, toward the end of the fight, realizes that this person is somebody whose favor he needs to seek, and he says, bless me. It is none other than God, one of God's many appearances in the Old Testament. When he shows up to interact with man, he shows up how? In human form. Remember, Abraham was visited by 3 men. 2 of them were angels, and one of those men Abraham calls Yahweh a number of times. It's God in human form, so he can interact. And the angel of God is giving Jacob a visual, tactile illustration or object lesson of what his life has been like. Jacob was left alone. This fellow appears out of nowhere and wrestled with Jacob until the break of the day. Why? Jacob is probably wondering the whole time, why are you picking on me? And even though the guy probably got the best of Jacob quite a bit, Jacob would not let him go. That's all it means that he prevailed. It's not like Jacob was winning the fight. This is God. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he couldn't get him to give up. he touched the hollow of his thigh, and Jacob's thigh was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And this is kind of a miraculous disabling of Jacob. And Jacob realizes, whoa. And then he said, let me go, for the day is breaking. But Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. He knows who it is, and he wants his favor now. He wants his blessing. Jacob's life has been one of resisting and wrestling against God. This is a real turning point in his life. Jacob has sought to live a life independent of God. Why not? If he's been able to get everything he wants through lying and cheating and tricking people, what does he need God for? And isn't that the same thing that Satan tried to convince Eve? You know, if you're like God, you can live independent of God. You don't have to follow his rules. You can do what you want. Jacob has resisted God's recommendations, restrictions, restraints, and regulations in his life. He does not want Yahweh to be Lord. Throughout his entire life, Jacob has been wrestling with God. Friends, is there something that God has been showing you over the past months or years? Something you know that God would prefer about your life to be different, and you've been resisting him? When we resist God's direction for our lives, it will only appear as though we are prevailing, that we're getting away with it. Because there's going to come a time when God says enough is enough. And God will show us our limitations. God has been showing Jacob that there was nothing he could do about Laban. There was nothing that he could do about Esau. And that Jacob had to turn to God. And if that doesn't work, God may disable you. He may increase your limitations. How many times have you heard me tell the story about my father-in-law? A good Christian man, living a good Christian life, but never talked to people about the Lord, very seldom. And God took his leg in a lawnmower accident. And after that, you couldn't keep his mouth shut about Jesus Christ. Fred was telling me this morning about a scrapper who loved to fight, who got cancer, got saved, got disabled by cancer, and told everybody, if it weren't for cancer, I would not know the Lord. The Lord is going to do whatever it takes to get your attention so that you are no longer wrestling with him and resisting him. He's a faithful God. God will show us his limitations. And what limitations does he have? None, because he is able. And when we resist God's direction, this will delay our blessings. When Jacob left the land of Canaan to go to Laban, what did he have? Nothing. And he didn't have anything for 20 years, did he? Folks, if you want God's blessings in your life, quit resisting God's directions, because I can tell you this, you are not going to win a fight with God.